Good morning. I'm Dave Anderson, and I serve as chair of the Master's Level Psychology License Clinical Psychotherapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Science Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. David Stevens.
Here.
Travis Hamrick, not here yet. Rebecca Jabara.
Here.
Bruce Johnson, not on. Lauren Luck, not on. Iris Pauley.
Here.
Robert Pedroza, and Dave, you indicated he might not be able to attend.
That's correct.
Jennifer Schreiner.
Here.
Josh Tangaway, who won't be here, and Kari Wool.
Here.
I note the following BSRB staff members are also present. David Fye.
Here.
Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On May 22nd, 2024, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with a subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical difficulties during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I did check it before we got started, and there's no one on the conference call currently, but if I hear someone beep in to enter, I will let you know.
Thank you, Dave. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on our agenda. We will move to approval of the agenda or any additions to the agenda. Does anyone have any additions? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, all in favor, please say aye. Show of hands is good. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we'll take a look at the minutes. Has everybody had an opportunity to look those over? Okay. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our advisory committee meeting on April 3rd.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye or raise your hand. Thank you. Motion carries. Dave, we'll go to your executive director's report.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. Let's start out with some operations update. first, the BSRB has a new website. The address has not changed, but for those of you that have not visited the website in the last month or so, I just want to let you know it will look a little bit different the next time that you enter the website. Now, a lot of our functionality is still the same. The change to the Granicus platform was done. A lot of agencies are shifting to that direction. One of the main benefits of moving to the new website is there's more ease of access for individuals that are accessing the website using a mobile device. But like I mentioned, all the same functionality should still be there. And also, we have new buttons at the top of the page to try to help people with access to some of the information that they want to get to directly. So if you have any questions about the website, or if you see something on the website that looks a little bit different, just let us know. We're still working through just a couple of small items, but very happy to have made that transition. It's been a lot of work behind the scenes for several months, but happy to have the new website launched now. Additionally, in terms of a new service, behind the scenes, we have been working with a group of representatives from a company called CE Broker, and we have now finalized an agreement on behalf of the board of the BSRB to partner with CE Broker. Just as a reminder, what CE Broker is a company that partners with state licensing boards like the BSRB to offer a free service to licensees, so that if you are selected for audit at the time that you renew, currently right now, we audit 10% of all of our licensees when they renew their license. And at that time, our licensees have to provide documentation to show that they completed all of their continuing education. What CE Broker does, they provide a platform for individuals to be able to sign up for a free account and then upload their documentation of continuing education, assign it to specific categories. So that way, if they are pulled for audit, instead of the traditional back and forth, we can log into the portal, see that they have the required documentation, it's in the right categories, and approve them for audit much quicker. So it is a nice service for licensees. It's a way to not have to just hold on to all the paper, and also a way to speed up the audit process. And so the way that they actually make money, there are some higher levels of accounts that individuals could choose to sign up for. They're also, they provide a service to help connect licensees to additional CE opportunities. So there are some additional services there, but the main thing we wanted to make sure was in our agreement was that there would be no cost to the BSRB to enter into this agreement, and there would be no cost to our licensees for those free accounts. So now that the agreement has been reached, the next step in the process is we will be starting to roll out the ability for our licensees to sign up for those free accounts. The plan right now, I think, is they're going to start with one of the professions first, the professional counseling profession. Then after that, move to the social work profession. And then after that, go ahead and just do the other professions one after another. So we will put out information once we start getting to the point to where individuals can sign up for those free accounts, and we'll have information posted on our website as well. Next, turning to some other updates. I thought I would let you know some information from the previous board meeting. The board met on May 13th. This was a regular board meeting. One of the main items, the board did a roll call vote to adopt about 11 different proposed changes to regulations that have been going through the process. Some of these had to do with some of the requirements for licensure for some of the professions that dealt with the in-residence definition that we have talked about in the past. There's also some information there specific to master's level psychology that had to do with the definition of core faculty versus non-core faculty and some of the requirements for licensure for certain programs and individuals who would apply for licensure. The legislative committee that reviewed those proposed changes had expressed some concerns about a couple of terms that were being added to the regulation. One was the term synchronous and our use of the term synchronous video conferencing. And so the board did vote to adopt some additional language to clarify that when we use the term synchronous, we're meaning real time. And then also there was concern about the new word biopsychosocial that was recommended to be added to the addiction counseling profession. There was one of the courses that was required for addiction counseling applicants used the term substance use in one of their required areas. And the advisory committee and ultimately the board had recommended replacing that term in that one instance with the use of the term biopsychosocial. And so the legislative committee had requested some clarifying language on that term. So now the language does further explain that biopsychosocial is the biological, psychological, and social well-being of the person. So as that has now been clarified, The board did do a roll call vote to formally adopt those proposed changes to the regulation. They were published in the Kansas Register on June 6th. And so those proposed changes to regulations are effective 15 days after publication. So I believe that will likely be Friday, June 21st when those will be effective. So we'll be sending out a message to licensees sometime soon about those new changes to the regulation. But what most of the changes will affect it will allow additional applicants for licensure to meet the requirements if they attended non-accredited programs, or if they are from a profession that may not have a nationally recognized accrediting body, such as master's level psychology, or in a lot of states, addiction counseling. Another item that happened at the board meeting on May 13th, there was reappointment for a number of the different advisory committee members. So I'm happy to announce that the chair of the board did reappoint Iris Pauley and Josh Tangway for another 2-year term on the advisory committee. Each member serves a 2-year term, and individuals can serve up to 4 2-year terms. They are staggered, so anyone who did not come up this year, the end of your term will come up next year. So I'll reach out to any individuals who are still on the advisory committee next spring and see if you're seeking to be reappointed for an additional term. Also at that board meeting, the board had some conversation about some of the language in the advisory committee policy as it related to terms on the advisory committee. We've had some long-term members that have really added a lot of value to the advisory committees, and the question was, does the board want to stay with the existing language that you can only serve 4 terms on an advisory committee, or should there be some more flexibility with that? Knowing that there is some value in having new members added to the advisory committees. So what the board ultimately decided was a change to the advisory committee policy that would say that if you serve on an advisory committee, you can serve up to 4 2-year terms if you are reappointed to those terms. And then after your 4th term, you would need to have a break of at least 2 years. And then after at least a 2-year break, if you wanted to seek to serve on the advisory committee again, you could do that and be reappointed for up to 4 additional terms. So maximum length of service of 16 years, but after 4 terms, there would need to be a 2-year gap in service. So that is ultimately what the board decided for that item. Additionally, the board has an appointee to a group called the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. That is an entity that uses federal dollars from some of the opioid litigation lawsuits and grants it to entities that are providing substance use services throughout the state. And the BSRB does have an individual who's been serving as the BSRB's appointee, and that is Jason Hess. And ultimately, when the board appointed him to that position, they decided that they would do that for 2 fiscal years and then revisit that reappointment. So the board had a conversation on that and decided to reappoint Jason Hess to continue to serve as the board's appointee to the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board for the next 2 fiscal years. Just a couple other new items. One, so currently the board utilizes My Licensed Office and system automation for the licensing system the board utilizes, and that is hosted and provided by the Board of Healing Arts through an agreement with the state. However, last year there was a bill that passed, and one of the items in that bill was for the state to create a new enterprise licensing system. So it was for an enterprise licensing system for any state agencies that would want to move to a new platform. And this was through a company called Estella. And since that time, there was it was thought that perhaps the implementation costs might be covered by some of the pandemic-related funding for modernization, but it was not completely guaranteed. And then there was also the question of what would be the ongoing cost year to year after the implementation. Recently, we did get confirmation that the implementation costs would be covered if the BSRB would want to switch to the new platform. And also the legislature passed a bill that would pay for ongoing operating costs of the licensing system for at least the foreseeable future. And so currently right now, the BSRB pays about $72,000 per year. And so being able to eliminate that cost would be a cost savings to the agency, and ultimately something that we could factor in when we look at trying to not raise any licensing fees on individual licensees and other costs associated with running the agency. So the board ultimately did vote to move to the new platform with Estella. That process will probably take about 2 years based on the number of other agencies that are in the line to move over. But in the meanwhile, behind the scenes, we'll be working with representatives of that company in terms of getting our forms ready for them. One of the other benefits that was really compelling is right now we have some processes that are not fully connected and integrated. For example, we have a payment portal that is separate from the paper applications when individuals apply for licensure. With the new system, we would be able to offer electronic applications for licensure. These would be tied to the payments for those individuals, so it would be a little more seamless. And then there are also ways that we can have individuals directed to answer every question. There would be less opportunities for individuals to miss questions during the application process, less technical issues. So it really will be a good approach. It's just something you will probably not see very much of for the next couple of years until we get closer to launching the new licensing system under the Acela platform. And then I did want to let you know too, at the last meeting, we talked about the proposal for the jurisprudence alternative. We mentioned that a lot of states require a jurisprudence exam for their licensees, but we did not want to add an additional cost to our licensees or an additional requirement for licensure, though we do want to ensure that the public is protected. And so we have a big interest in making sure that our licensees understand the rules and requirements. And so how best to approach that, we had an alternate proposal to essentially do quarterly 1-hour webinars where we would cover the same topics that would be covered in a jurisprudence exam, make it optional and offer credit for a continuing education hour for those and promote it and see what kind of response we got from offering it with sort of a carrot approach versus a stick. And so all the advisory committees had the opportunity to discuss that. We brought it to the board. The board received positive feedback from pretty much all the advisory committees. So that is something we'll be trying to put together this fall. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Anyone have any questions for Dave? As always, very thorough, lots of good information. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to old business. And the continued review of KAR 102-4-3A, education regulations for possible edits.
And this is just an ongoing conversation this year. We have included the proposed changes to the regulations in 102-4-3A. The only difference, well, I guess this was not altered by the board when they made their post-hearing recommended changes. So I just wanted to kind of bring this back to you to see if you had any additional thoughts on any recommended changes. We've asked each of the advisory committees to continue to review program level requirements, coursework level requirements. So I wanted to bring this back to you, see if there's any further comment today or not.
Has everybody had an opportunity to review that with the edits made? Leslie, did you have any comments you wanted to add?
No, not right now.
Okay.
I've been looking over the APA's guidelines for approving master's programs, but I think you're going to look at that later.
I didn't have any additional comments on that document.
Hey, Dave, I don't know if this is the time to visit about the issue around that we've run into with school psychologists.
We could talk about that during this part of the conversation. Yes.
All right. So just we've had a couple of individuals who have degrees in school psychology apply to be LMLPs. And in those situations, we have a person that the board contracts with who reviews their educational background and these regs to see if the person meets the technical criteria to be an LMLP. And we've had a couple who have gone through and been licensed as LMLPs. And part of that has to do with the language. So if you look at like page 2.1, where it says received a master's degree in psychology based on a program of studies that is substantially equivalent to the coursework requirements. And so it doesn't say clinical psychology. And so our expert, who has to be obviously fair and impartial and really kind of go by the technical language in the reg, has approved for the board to, as recommended to the board, to approve for licensure a couple of these individuals. And that's created some questions and concerns for me, because although they have a lot of the same kind of coursework, it's not exactly the same, nor is it always applied outside of an educational setting, or both with adults and children in terms of testing or their training in psychological interventions. So part of the question is, do we need to look at this language and recommend some revisions that might tighten that up and clean it up and make it easier for people who might be applying to understand whether or not they actually met the criteria. As has been mentioned on a number of times before, our primary role here is to protect the public, and that of course creates issues in terms of whether or not people are adequately trained to do the work that the license would allow them to. Dave, you have any other comments on that?
Just to say that, you are correct. Our goal is to protect the public, and also to make sure that we're treating people consistently. And if there does need to be some clarifying language, that is something that we can pursue in the regulations. If the language is not present, we like we said, like you said, the expert wants to treat individuals consistently and fairly based on the language that does appear. And Leslie, do you have any comments as well? I know Leslie sometimes is also involved with the review of some of the materials, considering the program level requirements and also the coursework level requirements too.
I mean, I think you covered it. It's not, I don't know, in counseling, they use the word broad, and that kind of makes it so that they can't use coursework specifically for school counselors. That it has to be a broad course that includes adults and children and things like that.
So I have a thought. I'm just looking at this, that it says in here, they have to do coursework on C, and then in C it lists all the coursework there. So if you have like a person that's pursuing school psychology, but then like their university has a classes that they could take to supplement these courses, they're doing the school psychology route. But then they decide to take, the other classes so that they can get dual licensure or become an LMLP. Could we look at that? I mean, as long as they meet the requirements for doing these courseworks, learning theory, the history of psychology, motivation, if they hit that coursework. I'm just trying to understand and how we can look at. I understand we have to. There's school psychologists, but if school psychologists decide to take extra courses to become an LMLP or LCP, how do we do that? I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Yes, actually, and I will go back to counseling. There are counseling programs within our state that are designed for school counselors and licensure as an LPC. So they include broad coursework as well as more specific child focus, guidance counseling type focus. So you can do that.
I wonder how this might be irrelevant, but I'm just curious as to how easy it is to go from one to the other. Like, if I work in the schools and I have the experience as a school psychologist, my job title as a school psychologist, can I apply for that license just as easily as the school psychologist can apply for the LMLP? And I don't know that that's up to us to figure that out. I'm just curious as to how closely relate. I don't want the LMLP license to be like an easy catch-all that everyone who got a master's in any, because there were, I went to Emporia State. There was a ton of different options. There's art therapy. There was music. There is the master's in counseling. I can't remember if it was psychological counseling or what, but IO, clinical. I mean, there were so many different areas, and yeah, there were some overlap, but there's a lot that were very specific to each degree. So I'm just curious as to how closely related all of these are. I don't know. I feel like this is a topic that's a little bit sticky. I don't think there's a right answer for this.
I agree I'm going to kind of add on to something Rebecca was saying, because I agree with the points. I think for me, and it was kind of the initial discussion too, let's say someone has been in the schools, right, for 15 years, it's when I'm thinking, time from leaving the school to going into the field, if you're in there for 1 year, you might still have a lot of that recollection of some of the skills that you previously learned in those programs. But the longer that you've been maybe away from your program, some of those things that maybe are more applicable to adults, perhaps, or, older teenagers, and maybe you worked with the littles for a while, I would just be concerned that, yeah, it would become a catch-all, kind of like Rebecca's describing. But if the skills haven't been maintained and it's been so long,
Right.
really appropriate as far as fit goes at that time.
Yeah. And I work with, about 45 school psychologists in my, not in June and July, but the rest of the year, I'm working with them, and I take the clinical aspect of these kids and I try and help the team figure out, interventions or strategies or new things to do with the kid from a clinical aspect, because the school psychologist has no idea. And so to think that they can just suddenly have that view is kind of difficult. And there's some that just don't have, honestly, I'm saying this in a kind way, and I hope this group understands, but they don't have the personality for it. Like, they're very data driven, and I use data, but then I also have to know that there could have been extenuating circumstances, right? So I also have to use, my data points are my data points, but I also have to have 5 other data points to make decisions and to work with students and to work with adults and to work with families. And some of the school psychologists have been trained that data is like, if they have this IQ, that means this, and they forget that, yeah, but their parents are yelling at each other every night, and they didn't sleep, and they didn't get food, and they, all the other circumstances that we have to consider. So there's just and I don't know if that was coursework or if that's just through my years of experience, the differences between the LMLPs and the school psychologist. I don't know.
To your point, Rebecca, I do think there is a difference between school psychologists and psychology practice out in the field.
Right.
I do see those differences. I do know that there are people who can do both and can do both very well. And
Sure.
so to this, you know, how do we help people who want to be able to use their expertise in working with children and working with families, do that out in the community or in a community mental health center or however that looks like in private practice, whatever. If they were to have, you know, in addition to their school psychology program, these certain courseworks that we identify as, you know, these are the clinical aspects. And if it's been so long, I don't know if we look at their CEUs to see, you know, what have they been kept up on? Have they been kept up on the, you know, trainings, interventions on how to work with children? Because it all comes down to competence for me.
Right.
You know, if they're competent individuals and they can do the work, like, and they say they can do the work, then they should be, you know, following their ethics and only doing what they can do, what they're competent
And
to
a lot
do.
of them, like the CEU subject, like I sit through those meetings with the school psychologist, and it's about district stuff, and it's about, you know, the new way to do behavior intervention plans or the new whatever for the district, right? And the school psychologist gets CEUs for it, but I don't. It doesn't count towards mine. So I'm not sure what their rules are with that, or how they can claim it. Maybe it's just because it's the school specific. I don't know, but so I'm not sure. I would, and maybe if there were, you know, an interview process, or we get to I mean, that sounds like a huge task, and it's probably unrealistic to be able to meet these people and to see if they could do both, but I don't know. I would just there's some out there that I would worry about. But that's probably in every field too. So I don't know.
I have a question. School psychologists do not have to pass the EPPP. If
Correct.
they want to become an LMLP, they have to pass the EPPP. Is that part of a bar? Or is it
Maybe,
not?
yeah, maybe, but
And that's Leslie, I was thinking about that too, but I was thinking even kind of broader where it perhaps they can earn the LMLP, but they maybe can't practice under the TLMLP until they show competency on the EPPP. Because that would also ensure that someone's not practicing even temporarily, because if they can't pass each, and I mean, the EPPP we know is difficult, right? So I know some people don't test well, and that's not meant to keep people out that maybe just have difficulty testing, but that could maybe act as a protective factor for the populations we serve by maybe not being able to practice under a temporary, and they would have to pass it in order for their license basically to go from one directly into a true held licensure without the T.
or with
I-
supervision or something for a year or something. I don't know. It just seems like they're as long as some kind of transition that like I like what you're saying there. Like it's something a little bit different to help them transition to use that LMLP license, whether it's not the benefit of the temporary license or with supervision or something there as a safety net to the public that might be needing their services.
I
Leslie?
don't know that you could specifically say, well, if you've been working in a school, you can't do this, because someone who went to school and got their degree in clinical psych could stay at home as a mom for 20 years and apply and get a temporary license and practice, and they have no skills. I mean, they haven't been using their skills at all except for parenting.
Yeah, true. And CEU.
And so I don't know that you could do that, because it takes a group and kind of puts them out and makes them do more than another group. But you could beef up what supervision looks like for a person who has a temporary LMLP for all of them. You could do something like that.
Leslie, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Just a clarifying question. How many of the people who apply for LMLP licensure, what percentage are coming out of clinical psych programs?
I'm not sure. I would have to see if we could get information from the database to see where they went to school. I don't
Because
have
I'm assuming
that.
those coming from within the state are almost exclusively coming out of clinical psychology programs, because those programs all kind of designed themselves on the basis of BSRB criteria.
Clinical or counseling psych, yes.
So is that kind of the easiest answer, is to simply, instead of saying that they've come out of a psychology program, that they've come out of a clinical or counseling psychology program? And then talk about the criteria of those needed for those programs. Because I think, to Rebecca's earlier point, if people start, we've got very specific art therapy or music therapy, or, and I went to school with people who were studying for school psychology. I took the coursework myself after completing my clinical degree. It's just quite different. I mean, the focus is different, the practicum is different, the interventions, they're very tailored for educational settings. But once you get licensed as an LMLP, other than your own, you shouldn't be practicing outside of what you're trained and comfortable doing. We've kind of lost control over what they can and can't do. Iris, you have some feedback?
I did. I had a question too, just kind of a follow-up with what Leslie was saying. So there's been a couple school psychs that have applied, and our definition is, so what you're saying is our definition is so open that they actually did meet the criteria.
Except practicum, yes.
Okay.
They have to, on all of them, because their supervisor was a school psychologist, it didn't meet our criteria, so they have to do 1,500 supervised post-grad hours before they can get their full LMLP.
Okay.
But they did have, when you look at like the psychologist or the school psych programs, we license school psychologists that came from an APA program as licensed psychologists, and they're passing the EPPP. So I don't know enough about the EPPP to determine if that's enough or not, but some of them have more in-depth, treatment courses and stuff. I think it just needs to be specified, like ethics in school psych, to me, doesn't meet the requirement, but our regs don't prohibit it. So
It's comforting to know that they still need to do the practicum, because it's their school psych. What they do is completely different than what we did as in the clinical psych master's program. So that's comforting to know that they have to have that training before they can do it. So, and I do agree that they shouldn't necessarily need to start completely over. Like, that doesn't seem right either. So that's nice to know that they have to do that type of training. I don't know. Iris, you're shaking your head. You agree with that? It's hard. This is a hard topic for me. I think it's just because I work with so many of them and so many of them would do great. So we'll keep it at that.
I agree. It's a very hard topic.
I think we do have some good systems in place now for like individuals who are going into, the licensure for LMLPs, like everybody's kind of mentioned. So maybe we do just explore moving into kind of shifting slightly like the supervision type of oversight. Maybe they get it a little bit more frequently than one in every 15. Maybe we do it every 1 in every 10 or something like that. And then because I hear you, like, we don't want to push people out, because if somebody's been a stay-at-home parent for years, like, we don't want to throw them under that as well. But it would allow us to just ensure that they're getting proper oversight to make sure they feel competent and successful but that they're also doing work that's ethical in all things, and then they can prepare for the EPPP.
Would we be comfortable in adding language that said a degree in clinical or counseling psychology, or if you wanted to then say school psychology with additional training that would meet the coursework criteria? So my concern is, I mean, we've had 2 get through, and we're just going to have more. And, you know, our job is to make sure that these people are appropriately trained and educated to provide the services that someone with this license.
Yeah. David, I would be comfortable with that, because then after review, let's say you review the paperwork, and it seems that perhaps they do need more clinical, it catches that, and then guidance can be given about, hey, this needs to occur before next step.
I like your thoughts, Dave. I really think that'd be good for individuals who are considering pursuing the LMLP, because I hesitate to make it only stating that you have to have a clinical and counseling psychology degree and not having exceptions, because I do think that limits us and limits our field. We don't have very many of us, and we don't have very many of us that want to see children. At least in my experience, I don't have very many of those knocking at my door. And so if there's a way to, school psychology with X, Y, and Z and pass this and have the hours of supervision to be able to show that they can do the work, that would be able to expand providers, good, competent providers who can work with our families in need in Kansas.
Good point. Well said.
David Stevens, any feedback?
No, I've been, enjoying the conversation. This all seems like I like your approach, David.
Leslie, what's it's easy for us to talk about doing that. It's much harder to put it into language that then has to be interpreted by your staff. Do you have feedback on that?
I actually would ask that I could talk maybe to Tim to look at the statute and the reg to see what we might add that could limit the coursework we approve.
Okay.
So that it's more counseling or clinical psych, and then see what he
So,
says.
so you want to take it to the BSRB in-house attorney,
Yes.
get some directions and bring it back to us?
Sure. That would be great.
Everybody okay with that? No, I think that's a great idea, because the worst thing we could do is come up with a solution that the attorney then says, yeah, you can't really do that. So,
Thank you.
all right, so we'll table that for further discussion. Thank you all very much.
It might be good context for him to review the recording of this portion of the discussion also, because I do think a lot of good thought was put out in this discussion that it would help him provide some feedback.
It's a great idea. All right, so we'll move to new business. Advisory committee membership, Dave?
Yes, so you, at your last meeting, it was referenced that Travis Hamrick would be ending his term on the advisory committee. And that would open up a spot in terms of membership. And there was a request to go ahead and send out a message to all licensees to see who was interested in being considered for the advisory committees. So we did do that, and we received responses back from a few individuals, and those materials were sent to you for your review. There were letters of interest and also resumes. And I think there were 4 individuals who had provided documentation for consideration. And so currently, I believe after July 1st, there will be 8 members of the advisory committee that are non-board members, which means of the individuals who applied for consideration, you could recommend one of those individuals, you could recommend 2 of those individuals for advisory committee membership. And in your packet, you should have a copy of the advisory committee policy. And so one thing I always like to highlight in terms of the discussions and this process and how it works, the advisory committee policy does include some language in terms of the criteria to look at. And it says, in reviewing nominations, the committee should work to ensure there is diverse representation, including but not limited to geographic setting, gender, culture, and ethnicity. It also says that members should provide representation of the levels of licensing for that discipline, and also that those members should be selected from among public and private practitioners and educators. And one of the items that sometimes needs a little bit of clarification in that, when it talks about diverse representation, including geographic setting, what that has generally meant is if there can be some distribution of advisory committee members across the state. And so if you have any questions on some of the technical aspects, feel free to let me know. Generally, I just kind of let the advisory committee members participate in this discussion amongst yourselves. Authority to appoint members to the advisory committee is with the chair of the board. So the authority the advisory committee has is to discuss the applicant, make a recommendation, and then if you reach a consensus, that is something I can pass along to the chair of the board. That she has the opportunity to request additional information, and if she doesn't have any questions or needs additional information, then she could appoint members to the advisory committee at the next full board meeting, which would be in July. But in terms of discussing applicants, I've seen it done different ways. The way that usually works the best, in my opinion, has been when individuals say, you know, given the criteria, who stood out the most to them. And so that could be a helpful approach to take. But yeah, I'll turn it over to you unless you have any technical questions on discussing the advisory committee applicant.
So I reviewed everybody, and I had 2 that stood out to me, in part thinking about not only the resume, their cover letter, but then also kind of like all of our roles and like the diverse group that we have, and given state and where everybody's placed. But Ginger in Southeast Kansas was one that stuck out to me. She has the addictions background, and the other was Sarah. She's the LCMFT. And kind of again thinking about like both of their placements, but also some of what they bring to the potential table for being on the board with us. I thought they both stood out. Those 2 stood out to me the most.
I don't know that, to be honest, that any of them stood out more than the others, but after our first discussion this morning, I did notice that Sarah, like you said, had the LCMFT and also the LMLP. So I was curious as how that worked. And Jana had an EDS, has an EDS, and is a nationally certified school psychologist as well as an LCP. So they might have want to put some input into that discussion we just had, but other than that, I can't say that one or more stood out more than the others. So I'm glad that somebody stood out for you. I don't know if anybody else has strong opinions one way or the other with these applicants.
Can you give me Sarah's last name?
Sarah's last name is McMillan, McMillen. And Leslie, the list of those applicants was emailed to you back on June 6th at 12:25 p.m.
I was just looking up to see when she was licensed, and her degree. So thank you.
Yeah, and I can give a little clarification on that issue as well. Because I too am licensed as an LCMFT. Those of us who are around for a really, really long time, when that licensure came into being, you could get grandfathered in if you could prove that you had been providing those types of services. You had to make application and then have some people who knew you professionally attest to the fact that you had been doing that work. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's also how she became an marriage and family therapist.
She was licensed in 2001.
Yeah. Iris, Jennifer, David, feelings on the applicants?
I also looked at the applications, and the ones that I was just looking at, like a diversity of how, you know, we can work with different people in different fields in our group, was Jana as well. And then I liked how I saw for Sarah, she had worked with military. So that one spoke to me. So.
Yeah, sorry. I thought they all yeah, brought something a little different to the table. So I know Ginger, I know she's great, different geographic area. So I like she has a ton of experience. I think the last one on there I did the her professional role is a little different, so I thought that might bring something different to the table. And kind of newer looks like she is a fairly recent graduate, so I thought that could, you know, be a positive thing for a committee as well.
David?
I defer to my colleagues.
All right, well, let's start with this question. 1 or 2?
I think 2 would be good. That way, if we have people out, like we still make quorum, and it would again give us, because remind me, how many do we have options? How many people can we have on the board?
So there is the board member who's appointed for that profession, who serves as the chair of the advisory committee. And then there is a public board member who also serves as a member of the advisory committee. And the advisory committee policy says, aside from those 2 individuals, there are non-board members who serve in the advisory committee. And for the non-board members, there can be as few as 3 and as many as 10. So after July 1st, there are currently 8. So you could recommend adding 1 individual, which would bring you to 9 non-board members. Or if you did 2, it would bring you to 10 non-board members.
I still think 2 would be good. I just was curious. I could remember.
Okay. So we've got a recommendation for 2. Anybody opposed to that? Or I think what this committee really needs is at least 1 more David. You know, we should just keep adding Davids onto this committee until no one knows who they're talking to. So everybody okay with 2? Or you don't have to be. Ed's nodding, we'll go with 2. All right. So somebody want to make a nomination?
Does anybody know or is familiar with the organization that Lydia is talking about? I think it's in Topeka.
Yes.
What I was trying, I mean, I read what she wrote, but what exactly is that?
Kifek essentially took over Kansas, like PBS, positive behavioral sports.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. That might be an interesting perspective too, to have. I think this is the hard part, is narrowing it down.
Well, as was mentioned, I think, all worthy candidates, everybody brings something unique and worthwhile to a committee like this, but we've got two, so
I nominate Sarah.
all right, let me back up and see Sarah. Sarah's from Salina and is in private practice. Did some work with the military and some teaching in her background.
I would second that. I like her. She's got quite a range of settings that she's worked in with inpatient, community mental health, government contracting. I like her as well.
I'm in agreement.
Okay. Iris?
All right. Yeah, she looks great.
All right. Looks like we have a consensus. One down, one to go. Someone want to make a nomination?
I like Ginger's letter of interest. But if
I was
somebody
going to
else-
nominate Ginger as
Oh, you
well.
were?
And I second or third because they on Ginger.
All right. Jennifer, how do you feel about Ginger?
I think she'd be well. She'd be good. She'd be good.
All right, looks like we've got a consensus then on our second pick. Anything else we need to do, Dave? Do we need formal action on that?
You could take an official vote, or if there's consensus, either way is fine. But it sounds like there's consensus on recommending Ginger Hill and also recommending Sarah McMillan.
Yes.
Right.
Everybody nodding?
Okay, so the next step is that I will put together just a short letter that basically just summarizes that the advisory committee went through the steps in the process that the advisory committee also talks about. The advisory committee reached a consensus to recommend those two individuals, and then I'll provide that to the chair of the board and David Anderson. If she has any additional questions or requests any kind of clarification, I'll go ahead and make sure to connect the two of you for any kind of question.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you all, great discussion. We'll move on to the discussion on the APA accreditation of master's level psychology programs.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kind of start this conversation. So one of the complicating factors that we've had for the last few years is the BSRB oversees 7 different professions. And for most of those professions, there's a national accrediting body that's widely recognized. And when individuals apply for licensure, we look at their educational qualifications. And if they attended a program that's nationally accredited, usually those individuals can move through the process fairly quickly. However, for individuals who did not receive their education from a nationally accredited program, it can be much more difficult. We have regulations that provide flexibility to evaluate applicants by looking at program level requirements and coursework level requirements to figure out substantial equivalency. But it does take a fair amount of time, and sometimes we have to bring in experts to assist in that process. And for the master's level psychology profession, just kind of as a reminder, only about 17 states license at the master's level, and the terminology used by those states is vastly different. We have 2 levels of permanent license, which also makes us a little bit different from some of the other states. And so historically, the APA has not officially accredited master's level psychology programs. And recently there was information that was put out by APA as far as accreditation standards for health. I believe it was health science or health studies psychology. And
Health service, was that
Perfect.
right?
Health services psychology, and I attended the mid-year meeting for the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards recently, and there was a representative from the APA there who was talking about how they are just starting the process of looking at letting schools, master's level psychology schools, seek accreditation under the standards. And so there's a sort of a short list of schools that are seeking the accreditation so far. As of right now, I don't believe any of them have gone through that process completely, but there are some that are being reviewed for that. And David Anderson had highlighted some information that we shared with the members of the committee that you could review in preparation for the discussion at this meeting. So I kind of wanted to frame this conversation that way. It is a little tricky because some states may not have the same standards for master's level psychology that we do. The scope of practice may potentially be limited depending on what they're able to do with a master's level psychology license or whatever they choose to call that. So in looking at accreditation standards, I'm not sure that it's comparing apples to apples. So there's a lot of complicating factors in here, but since there is now a move to accredit master's level psychology programs, it's definitely something relevant for the advisory committee to be reviewing and discussing. And we've also been having the conversation about our regulation that deals with educational requirements for licensure for some of the other professions. What we're in the process of doing is looking at what the national accrediting body has for criteria and seeing if our regulation is too far different from what the national accrediting body would require. But given the complexities that I've just kind of mentioned, I'm not sure we can do the same level of analysis, but maybe it would be helpful to kind of also be looking at that regulation in terms of what the accreditation standards are they have put out so far. So, but I'll turn it over to David Anderson. And David, I know that you looked through some of the material and just wanted to see if you had any thoughts you want to share with the advisory committee as well.
I appreciate your framing it in that manner because it is certainly more complicated than with some of the other professions because this is really not a group that represents master's level psychology programs or professionals, and in the past has worked to keep that level of group from being licensed in a lot of places. So, and I don't know, part of my interest was in one that they're calling it health psychology. So again, it's working to protect clinical psychology from their perspective as a PhD level. But they're also lumping school psychology and master's level clinical psychology programs together under that broader umbrella. And so I don't know if that would make what they're doing make it harder for groups like ours at the state level to differentiate between, we couldn't, it seems like it would make it harder to adopt that as a standard like social work has or counseling or marriage and family therapy. Am I reading that correct, Leslie, Dave?
It does say, yeah, because we weren't really familiar with health psychology. So, yeah, it encompasses all of it. It includes, but it's not limited to school counseling and clinical psych. So it does say they may have to take additional courses if they want to do school psychology or things like that. And another thing that is problematic, and it's the same for licensed psychologists now, APA is not requiring specific courses. They're outcomes based, and so they are saying things have to be covered, but they're not specifically saying there has to be a course in ethics or a course in motivation or, you know, things like that. So
Yeah, I was looking at the course stuff. It's super broad.
Yes. And I've got a call into the clinical psychology program at Fort Hayes to try to get a understanding like where they're at with this and whether that's something they're looking at. And it will be interesting to see whether or not they find this to be something that would ultimately be useful, they think, for their students and the other programs.
Yeah, the health service psychology piece is interesting. Do you know if they, like, across other states, do they tend to use the that terminology at other schools, or overseeing entities? Because like there's not any, I mean, you don't see health psychology labeled at university level. It's just interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, to Dave's earlier point, you know, we already know that only 17 states license people with master's degrees in psychology. Because it's not considered the terminal degree like it is in social work or marriage and family or counseling. Other feedback? I noticed, Leslie, they used the term core faculty a lot, where we've just worked on getting rid of that.
Yes, they did.
And it's, I think to Dave's point, this is part of the issue is in the other fields, when they have like an accrediting body that most of the universities are following and most of the states are following, it becomes easy to kind of pull that all together from if you go into this educational program, you can get licensed in this way. I'm not sure this is going to add much clarity as I read it now, but
There's also a piece that says they can elect to meet the following areas of knowledge at the undergraduate or graduate level.
I didn't see that, but I didn't read it word for word, so.
I mean, that just adds to the complexity.
in some, you know, social work, if you have your bachelor's degree in social work, then you can get your graduate program done in a year. And I know there were some programs in the state looking at that, but that's in our current regs not allowed, right, Leslie?
Correct. I believe Fort Hayes asked about allowing a couple graduate courses to be taken as part of a bachelor's degree as they work toward their full master's degree. But that's the only one that I've seen that with. And we couldn't approve it because it's not in our regs.
Yeah, David, I agree with your comments. You know, there's a lot more uniformity for some of the other professions, with the exception of, let's say, addiction counseling, and to a certain extent, behavior analysis as well. But let's say, you know, for the social work, generally, a lot of the states at least have a master's level social work permanent license and a clinical level social work clinical license, and they tend to recognize CSWE as the national accrediting body. So if someone attends a CSWE accredited program, the requirements are for licensure, also that they are taking, in almost every state, they have to pass an appropriate standardized national exam. And it just kind of is almost the same in every different state. In this case, since there's only 17 states that have licensure for master's level psychology, and the requirements are different state to state, even at the national level right now, the conversation, ASPPB is attempting to try to figure out a proposed set of licensing requirements that, you know, states would not be required to follow, but would attempt to bring some uniformity to it. We've compared that to what we currently have in Kansas, and some of those things would be difficult for us to implement. For example, they've talked about having a pass point in the EPPP of 450, whereas we have a pass point of 400. And they've talked about having two different tracks and limiting scope of practice depending upon the model that, you know, they're looking at currently. So there's not a lot of uniformity in terms of licensing. There's not a lot of uniformity in terms of which states are even licensing at this level. And so it is tricky to figure out the role of, even if a master's level psychology program would become APA accredited, what does that mean for our standards for licensure, since there are all these differences? Not to mention the competency versus coursework, which is a challenge in and of itself.
So we'll leave this on our agenda, and as we learn more, we can continue to talk about it. I think some of us thought that this might be more helpful than it appears to be in its current state anyway. But as it hasn't been widely adopted, and it is, as was previously described, very broad and vague, and so we'll leave it there and kind of see how it evolves. Everybody all right with that? Okay, Dave, let's move to item C. Discussion on possible survey for licensees.
Okay, so we have had a conversation about, in the past, the BSRB has helped the Social Work Advisory Committee put together a survey for licensees. And we've had a couple of reports that are posted on our website in terms of those large surveys that were put out back in 2021 and earlier this year in 2024. And that we have the ability to help each of the professions this year put together a survey of licensees if they think that would be beneficial to collect certain information. And it can be used to direct the work of some of the advisory committees if we identify issues or things that we might be able to provide help in terms of solutions. And so we talked about the social work survey. Additionally, the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee had put together some questions for a draft survey as well. So I shared those draft questions with you, and just kind of wanted to continue this conversation there are unique elements for each of the professions. So just kind of wanted to bring this back to the advisory committee to continue to work on possible questions for a survey and see what your thoughts were. The licensed psychology advisory committee met last night and also discussed possible survey questions. Some of their questions looked at items like supervision or trying to identify issues that practitioners have spotted in the field where individuals may need some additional training or continuing education in certain areas. So, but I want to get your thoughts on that list of questions the professional counselors are working on and see if there was any additional comments in terms of possible survey questions for licensing.
I like, excuse me, I like the draft, and I like the question 13 about experiences with telehealth or anything like that. I think I would add, I would just be curious to know if anybody who works with teenagers or adolescents or even 20-year-olds had issues with social media or anything like that. No, I haven't personally. I'm just curious if that's going on, but I like the draft questions.
I appreciated the question asking about whether people were having any difficulty getting supervision, because I hear that every once in a while, particularly in rural and frontier areas. Our group isn't as restrictive in that manner in terms of like having to have a BSRB approved supervisor in some professions. But I still hear on occasion that I think the video aspect has made that much easier. But even then, just finding people who are willing to kind of do that work. Have the rest of you heard that?
Well, and it's interesting. As you mentioned, there are a couple professions under the BSRB that have the required board-approved supervisors as professional counseling and marriage and family therapy. And we had been hearing some concerns from individuals seeking to accrue hours for a clinical license that there was a lack of availability of supervisors, especially in the area of professional counseling. For that profession, there's about 250 people that are registered as a board-approved supervisor. But what we had heard was when applicants were trying to find someone, nobody was taking individuals to provide supervision. However, Leslie did an exercise recently where she actually reached out to all 250 of the board-approved supervisors and got responses back from a large number of them to see if they were registered at one point. Would they stopped providing supervision? They like to be taken off the list, basically. Are they full and not able to take any additional people, or are they still seeking? Are they still open to taking on more individuals to supervise? And she got responses back from, I believe, about 100 individuals that said they are open and would be happy to take on more supervisees. So that has provided us with a nice tool when we get concerns about lack of availability. We now have a list of 100 people we can send out for professional counseling. But there has been sort of a shift in the transition here because when there was more of an emphasis on in-person supervision, we sort of did a different type of analysis, and we were sort of informally looking to see, okay, how many miles are you within a supervisor? But now with being able to get all the supervision hours online, it has a different kind of a different type of test. And it comes down to can you find someone by televideo? And now that that's opened up where you can get all of your hours that way, you can get someone to provide supervision who could be across the state. So it's a different kind of test when we're looking at availability. It's not so much of an in-person type test. It's more of, is there someone who's willing to do that by televideo?
I was just gonna say, I don't think we have a lot of complaints from LMLP saying they can't find a supervisor. The one person who's been arguing with us was an LCPC who was reading his regulations, so saying that he could have a different supervisor when an LMLP cannot, so.
And Leslie, you mean he was reading the wrong regulation, correct?
Yeah, he was reading the counseling regulation rather than the LMLP regulation, so. But we really don't get a lot of pushback from LMLPs about getting an LP or an LCP.
I am curious. I mean, I find it interesting that the LCPCs, they have a list of those that would want to do supervision. And I know other licenses like the BACB does a list of those that want to supervise. They ask that, and you have to mark that on when you do your license. I'm just curious, would there ever be an opportunity for those that are registered to like there be a supervisor list so that people know where in the state that they are and who they are? Because sometimes it's geographic. I feel like there's a lot of opportunities, you know, Wichita, Eastern Kansas, up in Kansas City, but you get out to the western side, there's not many of us that can that do that, and so I just didn't know if that would be an opportunity.
That is something I was planning. We had talked about that also for social work. And because the LPCs and LMFTs have a requirement that they have to do a training and become board approved. So they have a check mark. But when we work toward our new database, it is something that we have been talking about having that available to people who are just willing to provide supervision for the other professions that don't have a board approved supervisor.
Yeah, and very similarly with the BACB on their website, you know, the supervisors have to do an 8-hour supervisor training. And then you have to send that in to the board and they mark that you got it and you can do it. So, but on the BACB website, you put in your zip code and you can find, you know, where there's a BCBA within like 50 miles. So it's kind of nice that would be able to supervise you.
In reviewing it, are there any questions not on this example draft you think would be important to include?
I wonder if it's worth looking at, and this could just be me. I wonder how many of those that are licensed LMLP, LCP are practicing in like private practice, practicing in communal health centers, practicing, I mean, like just to get an idea of where we're all at. I didn't know if that is something other people thought about or if that was important. I was just curious for data.
So in terms of their work environment,
would you be curious to know too what percentage of their work was in person versus remote?
Yep.
I know this is on the agenda to begin the conversation of, but the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee also was contemplating maybe a question that was concerning artificial intelligence. And maybe the usage of that or any issues that practitioners have already seen as it relates to artificial intelligence. What would you think about a question kind of like that?
I think that would be good.
are there questions? You know, I liked the final one, the kind of open-ended one. Just asking them if there are things that they think particularly this group should be thinking about or aware of. I'm really interested in seeing what the responses are for that. So, Dave, you can draft up one specifically for the LML PLCP group, and then we can run it back by this group for its final approval.
I think that sounds good. So I'll bring back some draft questions for all of you for the next meeting in August. And then we can kind of tweak those to make some minor adjustments. And then if it looks good, we can plan to release it to licensees sometime after that meeting in August.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to a possible survey for educators.
The last meeting, we talked about this topic as well. There may be interest. I think there's been sort of an ongoing discussion that some of the programs, at least in Kansas, may have been designed based on what the BSRB would require. And if it's time to kind of revisit the program level requirements and coursework level requirements, you know, we've had licensure for master's level psychology in Kansas for many years now. And perhaps it's time to have a conversation about, are all the topic areas the most relevant to the profession? Are there things that are missed? Are there things that had more relevance at some point in the past that may not need to be required, or maybe changing from a specific requirement of one course to more of an elective type model where you have a choice of a few different options for something. So there's some flexibility, but at the last meeting we talked about some of the advisory committee members may be considering types of questions that might be relevant for individual educators, and then we could potentially look at sending them a different type of a survey so they could provide information back to us on. I was curious if any of you had any thoughts on questions that we could ask some of the programs in Kansas.
As part of my conversation with the head of the Fort Hays State program, I had planned to ask kind of if they felt like what they were doing currently was still meeting the needs and kind of where they saw the needs of the profession going, or whether there were things they wish they could do that were kind of outside the current regs, as well as just a question to them about their awareness of the APA accreditation process and what they were thinking about that. So I hope to come out of that with some more kind of specific stuff, Dave, that I could send you.
You know, sometimes we talk about the work that the experts do as it relates to reviewing programs. And in KAR 102-4-3A, sections F and sections G, there are program level requirements. And the language there is pretty strict. It says, in order for the applicant to qualify for licensure, the educational program completed by the applicant shall meet all the following conditions. And so one thing we are trying to highlight as part of an ongoing conversation is with that language being very, very strict, it does say shall, that there's not a lot of flexibility there. So some of those requirements, the question is, are they unnecessary to still retain in the regulation for us to be able to approve someone for licensure? Because what the board is asked to do is that if someone does not meet all the requirements, or their program did not meet all the requirements, then technically they would not meet the qualifications for licensure. And so if those maybe are outdated, but they were based on things that were true, 20 years ago. That may be something to take a look at as well. Or if they are, let's say, best practice standards, but not necessary for, what is necessary for a program to meet the qualifications for licensure. That's something else to be thinking about too, because we're not looking at trying to have the gold standard in terms of having, the best possible standards for licensure. While there is a benefit to that for sure, it's really trying to kind of balance out what is necessary to make sure that individuals are still able to get licensed in Kansas for workforce, and making sure that what is there is helpful to protect the public as well. So just something to keep an eye on when you're looking through sections F and sections G as well.
Very good. Thank you, Dave. Regulation of artificial intelligence. I'm really curious to hear more about this.
Yeah, so this is something that was mentioned at the last board meeting, and it was referred to the advisory committees to start a discussion on this topic. We have received a few questions recently. Our statutes and regulations are all sort of written from the perspective of a person providing services. And there have been some shows recently. There was one on 60 Minutes that caught a lot of attention about applications being designed, chatbots providing therapy. And how, what is the role of the regulatory body in terms of something like that? If someone follows the advice of a chatbot and then a harmful thing happens, what do we do? If a therapist provides direction and there's a complaint, we follow up with the therapist, we get a response, we investigate it. But how do we approach a topic that is complex like this? And it kind of gets into also a conversation of what is artificial intelligence. I think there are certain things that a lot of people would put into one category, but there are small uses of artificial intelligence that people are probably using on a day-to-day basis that they may not all agree whether it's artificial intelligence or not. And so we wanted to have the advisory committees start a conversation on this topic to try to see if there's a way that we could tackle this. Some of the associations are also having conversations along this line as well. In some ways, we're kind of playing catch up because artificial intelligence has continued to evolve very fast. But since the other associations are putting together groups to have conversations on the topic too, we're kind of right in line with that work as well. So, but we thought this might be a nice thing for the advisory committees to kind of weigh in on. And if we can be helpful to provide more research for you, if you know someone in your profession who maybe might have things to add to the discussion. I know some of the advisory committees had asked, is it possible to bring in speakers if they're aware of someone who, speaks about artificial intelligence? That's something that, we can have public comment at times. So it's just kind of one of these big items on the horizon, and we want to make sure that we're getting out in front of it, or at least catching up to be responsible in terms of how we regulate this topic. Do y'all have thoughts on artificial intelligence, or maybe what the role that we can play in this area might be?
I would assume that if someone's going to use AI for therapy, that they would have to sign some kind of consent saying, I understand this isn't a real person and anything that may happen. I mean, when you start therapy with someone, you talk about the risk and the, what possible, how it's difficult and the possible. So I would assume they would have to sign something. Are you saying they don't necessarily? I mean, I would hate for them to just use AI and then file a complaint because they didn't understand the ethics or the potential risk of it. I don't know. That's scary. I don't know. There's some kind of consent form, like I understand this is not a real person, and if this does me harm, I understand that I cannot file a complaint against AI. I don't know. That just seems, I don't know.
I guess what I was wondering is if there's any practitioner use cases where I know in my world, people are starting to take transcripts of meetings and put them into things like Microsoft's Copilot plugin, and the automation is to create summaries, for example. And so I could see a couple use cases being using those AI tools to create summaries for, I guess, notes or whatever. But I mean, I could also see putting in input like that, transcripts, and then, seeking kind of advice back from the AI to say, what do you think I should say to this person, or something like that. I mean, there are all kinds of prompts that could be used in this context. And what we're primarily looking at in my world is putting guardrails around what people put into those chatbots, where there's not chatbots, but AI tools, where there aren't guardrails against protecting for corporate confidential information that goes in, unless it's within a tool that we've got kind of protections around. So, for example, the AI that's built into the Office 365 for our corporate instance, anything that the AI tool does is protected within our corporate data model, just like our email is, and our Word documents, and all the things that are stored in the cloud. It's not like they're going out into some bigger AI pool of data. It all stays internal for us. So for us, that's a safe place to use that kind of tool, as opposed to just taking the same transcript and dumping it into some like web-based Chat GPT or Google Gemini, where you basically are releasing everything into their big cloud of data. And so just thought I'd throw those use cases out as to kind of stimulate thought for how AI might start to creep into the practices.
I appreciate you raising that, because I hadn't thought of whether or not somebody might use a tool like that for a therapy note, to take a session that it's kind of recorded and then distill down a note.
I would go so far as say in 3 years, there's no way that anybody won't be doing that.
Yeah.
So the
see it
question
that way
is,
too.
where, how, what kind of guardrails need to be in place?
We at our center, we actually had a presentation on it where they kind of gave us overview of what that looked like, and we did have a lot of questions. We're not doing it yet because of all those questions, but I mean, I definitely see that heading that way.
Yeah, similarly, Iris, I mean, we have our EMR, our current EMR, as electronic medical record, has a application that where it can pick up on the session and pick up on certain key points and indicate if this is a CPT type session or a solution focused session or mindfulness session, and all of that, and then put it into the note. But it's still the responsibility of the provider to make sure that everything is appropriate and whatever's documented is appropriate, because our clients can get access into their chart, so and the records, so making sure it's appropriate. I think about consents for any kind of like Chat GPT or AI. We have a lot of organizations have consents for texting or video calls. I mean, telehealth, all of that. I would think that there would have to be some kind of consent to, if a understanding, like Rebecca had said, like, I'm going to put this in here. I understand that I might not get an immediate response, or if I have these concerns, this is a phone number I need to get to, 988. Because I think about people reaching out who have extreme difficulties in the moment and putting that into chat GPT or AI or in talking to somebody, but that AI or chat has no idea what the local crisis number is, or, you know, how to help that reach that person. And so just having some consents out there, some information out there, I think would protect our patients, families in Kansas, so that way they know, like, this is what they can cover, and if I need any help, these are the people I need to reach.
I think it's
Yeah,
really complex on that level because I mean, they're not licensed, it's not a licensed provider. So how is BSRB responsible for, I mean, they're responsible for those that they license. A chat box or whatever is not a provider. So I don't know if that's just more education to the public of what's coming. But I don't know how there's responsibility there. We're not, you're not licensing these, an individual there. Just, it's really complex.
Yeah, it sounds like two kinds of issues. One is, as David pointed out, AI tools that are probably going to work their way into professional practice versus AI platforms that may say, we can effectively treat your depression, but not be tied to a practitioner who is licensed by the state and therefore would be outside of kind of BSRB's purview to have any kind of oversight of. Dave, do you know, as other groups are talking about this, do they have more specific examples of AI related ways in which they see it impacting their specific professions?
Well, I think one of them is if you're using it with, you know, therapy or treatment, there's the issue in terms of you have the appropriate disclosures. There's also the issue of confidentiality, which we've kind of talked about. I guess there's also sort of the depends what you're using, but it could get into the realm of experimental practice. You know, if there are things that are not widely used and you're starting to use artificial intelligence in terms of helping you with some of the conclusions, you kind of get into some dangerous territory there as well. But most of the same kind of topics that I've heard so far, and the advisory committees have just started to discuss this since the last board meeting, but I think you guys are right on track in terms of what I've heard from them as well. So.
Because I remember seeing a recent news story about seemed like it was an eating disorders website that had previously had some people available to answer questions to people, and they replaced it with a chat bot that started giving really terrible advice to people, and so they had to pull it down because it just wasn't sophisticated enough to be able to nuance out and give really good advice and recommendations to people. In fact, in some cases, it was telling people that maybe they should go on a diet, and you know, because it's just kind of scraping larger information from all kinds of sources, which means it's often going to get some bad info as well. So I think, to everyone's point, it's clearly headed in that direction, but and I've seen some really good, what look like really good adjuncts to services where you have people go online and there are cognitive behavioral programs that they can complete kind of online on their own schedule that are training and designed to be kind of an adjunct to therapy that looked really, really good and had some really good outcome data. So sounds like something to keep on our agenda, Dave.
Yeah, I think this probably was a good agenda topic to just keep on the agenda and have some further discussion. And I will make some notes on what the other advisory committees are talking about on this topic too, and so we can share those comments with all of you at the next meeting too.
Thank you. Next is a discussion on adding a description of each profession to the website.
Yes. So in the interest of protecting the public, you know, it can be confusing at times. We oversee 7 professions, and there may be a lack of clarity for members of the public in terms of the differences between the professions and what the role is for individuals providing services under those professions. We have technical definitions for the terms and the statutes and regulations, but this topic has come up over the last few years that it would be helpful to add some information on our website, perhaps under the FAQ page for the different professions with just a short summary, taking into account that the audience are individuals from the public and trying to help them understand a little bit more about the professions that we regulate. So thought it might be helpful to defer this to the advisory committees to start to have a conversation on some general language that could be added to our website. We have a FAQ section for each of the professions. And so wanted to bring this up, and each of the advisory committees is having this conversation. And so wanted to mention it to you and see if you could, between now and the next meeting, sort of think of some language we could consider and then perhaps add that to the website.
Good, thank you. And you talked a little bit about the new website.
Yes, and just kind of wanted to highlight that on our website, we do still have all the same information, same functionality. But if you get a chance to look at our website, please let us know if you see any issues, or, you know, we're always trying to expand the services we're providing to people. So let us know if you have any thoughts or feedback there too.
I got on it the other day. I was impressed with it. I was like, oh, it's different.
Thanks.
But it was easy to navigate.
It's focused on kind of having a more clean look, and especially if you access it on the phone, it's not as scrunched. We had a lot of text before, and so now we still have links to a lot of the same information, but it's just trying to make it look a little cleaner, and so I appreciate that.
Okay. Any other items to come before the group, as we got about 8 minutes?
And Dave, I just wanted to say, I know he's not in attendance today, but this is the last meeting for Travis Hamrick, so just wanted to thank him for his service on the advisory committee. I did get a message from him during the meeting that did just basically say that he was called away at the last second for a different meeting, and so he wasn't able to attend the meeting today, but he appreciated his time on the advisory committee and wanted to thank him for that. On behalf of his service, we'll send him a certificate just thanking him on behalf of the BSRB, but wanted to give him recognition today and thank him again for serving. So.
Absolutely. I think he brought a very unique perspective with his work at in the state hospital system. So we'll miss having him on this group. If there's nothing else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Second.
There we go. Have a wonderful rest of your week and enjoy your summer. We're back together August 7th. Is that right, Dave?
That's right. Wednesday, August 7th at 1 p.m. over Zoom.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
You
you.
too.
See you all then.
Thank
Bye.
you.